So Shannon, I was
Got better sight lines.
You ever did?
Oh, that-
Oh, like you want it full screen? So you're like the bar, the top of the bar and stuff?
Oh, right.
Look at Shannon, how are you? One more step.
It's a busy.
Yeah.
How's that?
I mean, they've been moving at light speed, so it's
Nice.
Yeah.
Oh,
There you go.
nice, and then it's not.
also the complicated
Yeah.
things, I'm
Just
sure.
push more plus, makes it bigger.
Yeah.
Over 30 guys
Control minus makes it
play
smaller.
right now, so.
Ready for a couple days off.
I
Exactly.
am.
And yeah, to get out of it.
Not
too.
or down CIP stuff.
And you're gonna
Skate parks,
Yeah.
developers,
Yeah.
busy times.
Whereas, look towards. I know, I don't need. Yeah.
Sorry. Back of oxygen. We're ready by this clock. I think that was right.
I don't think either one's perfect.
Hold on, Jay is almost here. He's coming.
Is he coming?
Jay's here. Okay, now we can finally start the meeting, Jay.
Last guy in was supposed to bring treats.
Cocktail.
All right, little late.
No, you're right on time.
You're right on time.
Yeah, we've been watching the clock. We've got 10 seconds.
10 seconds to spare. This meeting of the Livingston Commission is called to order. May we have roll call, please?
Chairperson Bennett,
Present.
Commissioner Hopwood, here, Commissioner Friedman.
Here.
Commissioner Schwartz,
Present.
Commissioner Sandberg.
Present.
We'll now have a moment of silence. Thank you very much. Let's rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, first order of business are the consent items. Is there a motion from the commission on consent items? Be bashful.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I make a motion we pass consent on ZDC.
I'll second.
So there's a motion by Commissioner Friedman and second by Commissioner Bowman. Roll call, please.
Chairperson Bennett,
Yes.
Commissioner Hopwood. Yes. Commissioner Friedman.
Yes.
Commissioner Schwartz,
Four.
Commissioner Sandberg.
Four.
Motion passes. Tonight, there's no proclamations. However, there are two scheduled public comments. First one is scheduled public comment. Katie Weaver, MSU Extension, with update on economic development. Katie?
Good evening. Excited to be here. I've actually been working to be here for over the last few months, and we've had some timing challenges. So thank you for the opportunity just to give you a quick update. And then I'd like to entertain some questions or comments, hopefully from you guys. I'm assuming some of what I'm going to share with you tonight is probably not a surprise, because as you can look around our community, a lot of what's happening is very visible. I have experienced, especially in my office over the last 6 months, a really heightened interest in investment in Livingston, and we're also we're seeing the fruit of some of that in projects I know you're working on, and a few that I've been pretty close to from the beginning. It's interesting, some of it is from within and local, and some of it's regional, and I've even had some meetings with some folks from out of state. So the word is definitely out that there's opportunity in Livingston, whether that's good, bad, or indifferent. That's a totally different conversation. But I've seen a lot of that both on the residential side, obviously, and on the commercial side. As you know, housing has become one of our greatest challenges. It's nothing new to anyone in this community. Hopefully you heard that the Homeward and HRDC project for the old hospital was awarded in the second attempt, the $5.8 million in low-income housing tax credits yesterday in Helena. I sat in on that call and just wanted to let you know that one of the board members pointed out that a really significant reason for why they thought this was a critical project to fund was because you had made the decision in tough budget times to waive those impact fees. And that was a real demonstration to them that this community is serious and the city is serious about how we need the need around housing. So that project, they will move quickly as they can when you're using complex funding mechanisms. That's now called Blue Bunch Flats, if you haven't heard. So it's no longer, I shouldn't refer to it as the old hospital project. The Yellowstone Grain Elevator is another one that I've been working on for a couple years, and they're set to start construction here in the next month or two. So that's right now slated to be mixed use. So we'll see some more housing units, market rate housing units go in there. Handful of local businesses that I've been meeting with over the last few months that are looking at larger expansions. We've explored different grant opportunities, loan opportunities to support that, and just some work around identifying sites, which has gotten really difficult. When you're looking for a little bit more space, prices have really gone up, both for existing construction, existing buildings, and vacant land. We have also seen an uptick in our interest in the brownfields program. Have a couple projects going on that right now, going on in Livingston right now. One to the tune of a little over $50,000 in grant to do the assessment of a project for potential redevelopment. And I have a couple others in the hopper where that's kind of can be a scary project for people when you're talking about finding out if there's actual contamination on their properties. So it can kind of be slow as you educate folks to what the program really is and what it can do for them. And just, as I said, lots of kind of businesses coming in, existing businesses primarily, and making a lot of referrals to the resources that are over in Bozeman around marketing and writing business plans and that kind of technical assistance that we don't provide in my office. Along with housing, workforce from the beginning has been a challenge. It's really gotten heightened over the last couple of years as it's exacerbated by the housing issue. A big complex project or challenge, just like housing is, and now they're intermixed. And so these are things I'm having a lot of conversations about, and thinking about, and looking for solutions. And there's no easy solution there. So really open to those conversations and thoughts and ideas around that. On the community development side of my work, we just had our third session of the 4th year of Leadership 49. We were up in Wilsall last week. That continues to be a really impactful program for us. It's really about growing more engaged leaders across the county. To date, most of our participants come from Livingston. That's something we want to continue to improve, greater participation from out in the county. But we've also continued to see some really great economic impacts from that program as well, which excites us. Somehow the word is out that our office is a resource for strategic planning. I've done quite a few strategic planning meetings or sessions over the last 6 months, and that's really kind of been an area that has surprised us. And in my work that I've been doing, a lot of that is with community groups and nonprofits, and I've done it with a couple of small businesses. Yeah, with that, that's just kind of a quick snapshot of the work I'm doing. In Livingston, obviously, I do a lot of work out in the communities across Park County as well. And if you ever have questions about that, I'd be happy to talk about what's going on out there as well. So welcome to entertain questions.
All right, any questions for Katie tonight?
You shared a couple of the projects. Can you share at this time any of the details of other projects that are?
There's a couple of the larger business expansion projects that aren't quite ready to be public. They're very close. So yeah, the few I referenced, hopefully within a couple more months, those could be things we could talk about publicly, and I'd be happy to come back when it's time or make sure I can get you updates on those.
Any more questions, Commissioner Sandberg?
Can you talk a little bit more about the strategic planning and the nonprofits?
Sure. This has been across the county. I've been doing this, I've done it for a couple chambers, the Community Council in Gardner, a couple nonprofits here. It's been an interesting journey since I started doing that. I think Darrell was participated in one of the first strategic plannings I did almost 3 years ago now. I've found that the results are really varied from that. We have a lot of nonprofits in this community, and it's only getting harder and harder, just like funding for government is getting harder, funding for nonprofits is getting very challenging. And we have a lot of nonprofits that compete for some pretty small local or regional pots of money. So I've seen some really use that as a launching pad to grow and get stronger. I've seen some make the decision that it's kind of eye-opening that perhaps we need to consider whether this organization needs to move forward or not. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but I've also taken them and made them much more compact, and I'm trying to change the language around. I think when people think of strategic planning, they think they need a 2-day weekend retreat, and they need to work 12 hours, and they need to create this long document, and oftentimes nothing happens with that. So I'm really working towards strategic action planning. I'm trying to get folks to think more of where are you at, where do you want to be in 6 months, where do you want to be in 18 months. I'm trying to get people want to go further. I'm trying to get them to not think beyond 3 years, because there's a lot for our organizations that they really need to do in the near term. And I've had mixed results on that.
Anyone else?
Did you work with the Homeward Project or?
Yeah, so since that hospital was sold, I've worked with the developer and helped create some of those connections. And then since Homeward has assumed, well, they're currently not the owners, but since Homeward really made the commitment to do whatever they could to make this project work, I've just helped make connections. I drive up to Helena to give testimony, help gather letters of support and their community outreach locally.
So with a project like that was presented to us as helping with the community and wanting our support, so if they bought the property for a little over $1 million from Mr. Salazinski, and then they received these credits for $5.5 million or whatever it is that they're going to sell to the developer. Do they sell them at face value?
No. And they actually don't own the property right now. NeighborWorks, Montana owns it as an intermediary. They do similar work. But that now they will move forward with the purchase from NeighborWorks. So there's a lot of volatility in the tax credit markets right now. If you had asked me this question, well, probably a year and a half ago, I believe the going rate then was about 85 cents on the dollar. There was a few projects out there. There's a project in Whitehall, for example, that the tax credits were purchased by Golden Sunlight Mine, which is a member of that community, and they purchased them at face value, which put a lot more cash into the project. I don't know where the number's at now, and that's definitely something I'd follow up with on you, or follow up with you for. But it definitely is not. That's where you get the investors to kind of buy into these projects. Is they have this increment of that tax that.
Right, I was just trying to look at the entity that purchased it, what profit they were making by.
The original entity?
If they purchased it for 1.2 million and then they're going to sell, they have credits that they're gonna sell, because the credits were given to them? Provided to, awarded,
Yeah.
and then they're gonna sell them, so I'm just looking at what's their profit that they would make off that.
Well, these projects typically don't have a lot of profit. And this is actually, this really isn't a question for me. Their budget is $7.7 million to, for full completion construction of that project. So even with this award, they still have a gap of funding they'll need to make up to funding the entire project.
Yeah, I totally understand that, so maybe I, just wrong question. So
Okay,
maybe
well,
well,
maybe
because I
wrong
was just, yeah, just trying to understand that, understanding the process better if we're supporting an entity making a profit, and if that was truly, I guess, my understanding of what the program was. But thank you. And then James, Chair, let me ask you a question. We've just had so much going on, and I lose track. The direction that we provide to Katie in this program, is that part of the compact now, or do we still need quarterly to provide direction? I've lost track of the structure.
No, still working off of the original contract that was issued 4 years ago, and that hasn't been reviewed.
Okay, so we meet, is it quarterly then?
No.
Or,
You mean the economic development?
yes.
No. There is no economic development committee at this point.
Okay.
Because we aren't funding Northern Rockies nor Prospera, so the only economic development program that we're funding is the MSU extension.
MSU. And so how do they get their direction from us of what we would like to see?
You know, we don't provide any direction.
Okay. Should we be, maybe? I mean, if we're paying for a position, I'm thinking perhaps we should be having some sort of direction of what we would like to see from our investment.
I agree, but you gotta have someone to spearhead that.
Okay. And is that a commission or administration combination?
I think it would be a combination.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions for Katie tonight? Thank you very much, Katie.
Thank you for your time.
Okay. Next scheduled public comment, Derek Smith and Lincoln on the McNair Street Park Committee. With update. You don't need to sign in because you're on the agenda. Okay, but we'll take it anyway.
Well, thank you for listening to me. So, and you made a favor. Hopefully everybody saw that. And it's also on the slide too. Lisa was able to get that one up on that side. Well, I'd like to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving on the front side of the holiday season, and with this, we are going to public bid. So I'm very excited to tell you this. We would also like to send a great many thanks to Shannon Holmes and Matt Whitman for helping us work our way through this public bid process. We'd also like to thank Lisa Earle. I harassed her to make sure that we advertise the meetings as often as we can. And we'd also like to thank the city administration and the city commissioners. We'd also like to thank James Bennett and a huge thank you for your community service over the last few years and your dedication to this skate park. We appreciate it greatly. And with that, we need another liaison from the city commission to CPC as well. So we need to figure out something, we may work with something. Well, the public bid, we'll briefly talk about that. The public bid still needs a few more I's and T's crossed. The bid will be advertised as soon as we can reasonably address the rest of the details in this proposal, which I'm not gonna say it's gonna be December 1st, but it will be as soon as possible, so it's gonna be around the beginning of December. I believe we should easily be able to attain that. The other reason that we are here is we have an opportunity, and it is with the Land Water Conservation Grant, and it's kind of one of the reasons that we're also here. We need the city's support to pursue the phase 2 funding, and so we need a municipality backing so we may basically apply and be a qualified contender for this grant. And I believe it needs to be brought forward as a resolution in the long run. The grant runs, I believe it is currently open, and it runs to the end of March. March 30th is the closing date. We should have a pretty good strategy on how to make this a very successful grant, and we will also be collaborating with Melody Montgomery with writing this grant as well. The third reason that we're here is, in the long run, the future of McNair Skate Park. The reason I'm bringing this up is it's also associated with a maintenance agreement that Shannon was detailing that we need to have with the city commission. We need a maintenance agreement to have us, I guess, to do the things that we need to do to maintain.
After the park is built.
Correct. And well, this is so in the long run, we should actually consider possibly expanding the scope of what McNair Skate Park actually does as a community. We should probably include other sports that need representation, like BMX biking, trials mountain bike, and we also have climbing boulders. These are all gravity sports that should have representation. They represent a clear outdoor recreational environment that we have in Montana. And these are not out of the ordinary, as we have actually the majority of these currently. And this may be this start to define the McNair Gravity Sports Community in the long run, and how to make that a viability. We'll get back to you on that, but we're basically seeking the seeds, and these will be defined in the long run. The first kind of thing that we want to do is obviously get the things we did. And what we do that.
It's pretty comprehensive.
Is there any questions for the skate park at all? Mr. Sandberg?
So you're gonna go out for bid, and what, remind me again the estimated cost of the project?
The range goes up to 320,000. And so right now we have approximately enough funds that we are at about a $60,000 deficit. If the park was to be 320,000. So we still have the strategy, we're still applying for money, we're still talking to private donors, and so we're chasing this go down with further, but so I can't really tell you exactly how much. There's the great $1 million question.
But you're
So
basically budgeting 320 or something.
Correct. And if it comes in less, obviously it would be beneficial. Hopefully it doesn't come in above that, we believe it more likely won't.
So how, projects in the past, I was told that we couldn't go out for bid until we had the funding solidified. So maybe for the city manager, how do we go out for bid if we don't have the total funds available?
You like this one, Jim?
Sure.
So, our goal all along was we can advertise this project, but we're not gonna bring in front of the city commission to sign a contract until the money is in the bank and can be transferred over to the city. So if we bid the job here in December, have a bid opening in January, that bid is gonna be good for 60 days. We can see the lowest responsible bid, see where we're at funding, and before we bring that contract for construction in front of the commission, the Skate Park Association will have the funds available, or we will have to rebid the project.
So that's the process then. If they, if we have a bid that say comes in at 300,000 and we don't have the funds, we're under no obligation to, we can, what's the process that you back out of the bid?
In that case, you just don't award the bid.
Okay,
And we had a project this summer where we bid the 6th Street Water Project, and it came in over 100,000 higher than the engineer's estimate, what we had budgeted. So we just sent a correspondence to the contractor saying we're not gonna move forward with the project.
okay,
The other strategy we have with the skate park is we can create a bid schedule that has, and break the work into different facets, and say the actual concrete work and the foundation work and gravel work is the primary goal of getting the skate park built. We can bid that as one item, and we can bid landscaping, topsoiling, things of that nature as a separate, and we can choose based on the funding if we're gonna award that or give that to the contractor to do.
okay. And there's, I'm just trying to think of reputation of having people come out for bid and they're not awarding something. Is that a concern?
It's not a huge concern. I mean, it happens frequently in different municipalities, and they know there's some risk with that, especially when you're talking to nonprofit through the city. That's probably a higher risk than normal. But I don't think in this particular case, it's not a huge thing. If we were doing this with, say, the downtown street project, I would be much more concerned about it.
Okay,
Absolutely, and the other strategy, and like I said, Lincoln or Garrett can speak to this, but I'm not a funding expert, but there's a good possibility if once this project gets out, and it is actually a project that some of the private donors in the area or other funding sources would come to the table knowing that we're at that stage of the project. It's actually out to bid, and if they're advertising with the public rather diligently to let everybody know that there is still a shortfall. And hopefully they can bridge that gap before we bring a contract in front of the commission in the February timeframe.
and what bid process would we use as far as, design to build, or what's the terminology we would use for this bid process?
So we have a set of plans that have been designed, construction documents. So it would be a contractor built plans.
Okay.
Follow our steps.
Thank you. And then the last question I had was on this conservation grant listed here, Derek. So you're thinking that this, or I should say that working with Melody, you want to go after this for the current project then, correct?
Correct, and we need to define some parameters because there's some matching funds stipulations regarding that, and I think we could probably do a collaboration with the farmers market. I think it's Western Sustainability as well as LBSA to kind of help bring a further development idea for that bigger part, as well as come to close with finishing of our project. There's approximately $150,000 available through this grant, but it does have to have matching funds. And there's also a time stipulation associated with that, we're diving into the information currently to understand it.
And what would be you had stated that you would need to bring that back to the commission. What is our role in this?
I believe it just comes down to one of the stipulations to apply for the grant is to have a municipality backing the project. So you only get the municipality only gets to choose one entity to apply for the grant. I believe Livingston applied for it a couple of years ago, and it's offered in a couple of years.
Okay,
So
thank you. Clarifies that.
Commissioner Hoagland.
Will the project go up to bid as a whole, or because in the past we've talked about having this in two parts? With the main skate park and the pool being separate, yet.
So most of our grants don't have stipulations on there. We do have one of our donations from Jeff Menz, Pearl Jam and Vitality Foundation has awarded this money. And we're trying to figure out how to detail the public bid so it works, like, because with the stipulation, it becomes a little difficult. We're basically trying to get the entire thing built, to answer your question. But if some of the parameters weren't met regarding certain aspects of the park and the bidding process, the Jeff and Met feature may be kind of put aside for a time being. But it will be bid as a whole, and that is phase one. We would really like phase one to include the Jeff role, but the stipulations regarding the funding may kind of dictate what will happen with that. And that's also subject to the randomness of the public bid. We just don't know for sure. Kind of causes anxiety a little bit, like.
So what's phase two then?
Phase two is the sidewalk, curb and gutter, the landscaping, green grass to sit on, benches, the further development of the park. And it always has been. If we go into more phases than that, it's hard to consistently convey a story time to time. And giving consistencies of what people think. So we try to keep it simple.
Yeah, phase one of the park you can run your skateboard on. That's kind of how I look at it. Phase two would be everything outside of that.
Yeah. Commissioner Sandberg.
Question for the administration. Before we go out to bid, would we have confirmation of copies of current financials?
Yes, we would.
Okay, and then they could be supplied to us as well.
Yes.
Okay.
When it came before the commission would know all the financials and the bid itself.
Okay, great, thank you.
On this conservation grant, what is the amount or the maximum amount awarded?
If we shop for the moon, it'd be 150,000.
Well, nice grass.
It's a lot of curb gutter,
Yeah.
grass, asphalt,
Can I,
all the really fun things.
can I have a point of clarification? If
No,
we-
well, if you're going to speak, please come up.
Sure.
And then go ahead and state your name and address for the record.
Melody Montgomery, 620 East Lewis. Just one point of clarification with the, as we asked for the full package of funding, there's a 50-50 match. So if it were a 150, it would be 75,000 or more.
Okay.
That's all.
Great, thank you very much. And the timeframe on it is it has to be submitted by March.
March 3rd.
And when does it get awarded?
I believe somewhere around August, September. So, which is time.
Time when theoretically the skate park could be finishing up its concrete and inner structure and ready to move into the amenities around.
Correct. And to coincide with the bid, we put a last start date on the bid that we're kind of rationally trying to. But it seems like we would like the contractor to at least start by April 1st and absolutely be done by August 1st. So the grant should hopefully work into our favor for the phase two.
Is there any more questions for Director Lincoln? All right, guys, thank you very much for coming out tonight and providing us that information. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you guys, I think for your support.
Okay. Moving on to our resolutions. We do have one resolution tonight, resolution number 4763, a resolution of the City Commission of the City of Livingston, Montana, accepting the water extensions for Acreville development. Mr. Cardus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is brought to us by Public Works Department. They've done the inspections and looked at the construction out there. This is the acceptance of the water main in Acreville development. If you're unfamiliar with the Acreville development, this is on Billman Lane. It's where currently the Taco Bell is being built, so this is the extension into that area. At this point, it's met all the requirements. It's been tested and it is ready for your acceptance into the city system.
All right.
If you want a neat little map on page 27, there's a great little map of the work.
Okay, great. Is there any questions or clarification from the commission at all? Resolution number 4763. Mr. Sandberg?
Just for history again, because I think I've only seen this once, can somebody please explain to us this process of the extension and why we do it and who pays for it?
Okay. So, that's a lot of one question. As far as the payment goes, it's usually paid by the developer with a payback agreement for future development, who will pay them back as they use this parts of thing. I don't know. Have we done a payback agreement on this one, Sharon?
You know, that'd be something that Jim
Yeah,
works
that's usually
with the developer on.
Usually that's the way that works.
Clarification just on that point before you continue. So would that have been one that Murdoch's been paid in and they would be paying back too?
Is this on the same system as Murdoch's or is this a different main?
The sewer system is on the same system
I
that
think it's a
Murdoch's
different water
installed,
main
but
extension.
the water main extensions and in Billman, we extended in Travertine for Murdoch's.
So basically Murdoch's came from the other direction. Okay, so this is a separate water system, but that did play a part in the sewer extension.
Okay.
And it is owned by the same developer for Murdoch's owns this property.
So the developer's paying for this extension?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And sorry to interrupt.
So it's built by the developer. Once they get it, obviously it has to meet the specifications of the city. And then once it's completed, and that's all done approved ahead of time as part of their development plan. And then at this stage, once it's completed, we inspect it, we make sure the water guys get out there, look at it, everything's good. And then at this point, we've said, yes, according to our rules, you have done the work in accordance with the standards, it meets all the testing requirements, and now we'll officially accept it into the city's water system.
Okay.
And just to add, I mean, all utility extensions have Department of Environmental Quality oversight. And so the plans have to be designed by a professional engineer and approved by Department of Environmental Quality staff.
And do we pay development quality staff for that or?
No, that's all the developers.
So the developer has to pay that subcontractor to review it and sign off on it. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Hoagland?
Shannon, you know, the lift station discussions that we've had in the past about this area, is this part of that then? Is this a connected issue? Because I know at that time, or previously, when the property was up for sale and potential development, that was a big issue.
Absolutely.
And then now we're at a different stage in the process and in the project, so tell us more about where it's at.
The Murdoch's developer, which is the same as the Acreville developer, they have signed agreements with the city saying if and when a lift station is warranted, they will pay their proportionate share of the lift station. And that is in effect for this development as well, or at least the state of the development.
Do we need a lift station yet, or where?
We do not. You know, this is where it is good to sit down with city administration, the developer, their consultant, the system that was installed for the Murdoch's development can accommodate this development in conjunction with the Murdoch's.
Right, and just to clarify that, that's all the sewer system.
The sewer system.
It's tonight, we're just talking water, just so that's why none of that information was in the packet. This is just the water extension, not the sewer extension.
Any
Just a
other?
little insight as well, you can see where this water line ends. The developer owns to the north side of, or the west side of Gilman Creek. So when that next parcel gets developed, they will need to extend the water main to their property line at that location. And depending on the development, we'll make a determination if the lift station is warranted based on the sewer flows.
Thank you very much. Is there any other questions regarding this? Is there any public comment? Any public questions on the extensions in reference to resolution 4763? Do we have a motion from the commission, please?
I'll make a motion to accept resolution. I forgot to- 4763.
Yes. So there's a motion by Commissioner Swartz, second by Commissioner Friedman. Any last minute points of clarification? Roll call, please.
Chairperson Bennett?
Yes.
Commissioner Vogel? Yes. Commissioner Friedman?
Yes.
Commissioner Schwartz?
Or
Commissioner Sandberg?
Or motion passes. I'm wondering, in the interest of timing here, I'm assuming that there might be a number of questions on action item A from the commission. So why don't we take up action item B and well, LSA to maybe they need to after that discussion. Is that acceptable to the commission? Commissioner Sandberg?
So with action item B, what, I could see there could be a lot of discussion with that too.
Okay.
But, and I guess maybe I'm confused, were we actually looking for a resolution on that one this evening? No,
Not a resolution.
or
no, it's just
a resolution, meaning a solution.
No, I think all we're really going to do is give the city manager direction.
Oh, okay. I'm okay with that.
All right. So that's acceptable, commission. Go switch A and B. Fine. Okay. All right. So, so in essence, the reason this is on the agenda is I had a conversation with OSA and they seem to have a need to get the contract resolved and for the commission as quickly as possible. Because without a contract, they really can't rent or lease, the space for activities or events. And is that correct? Yeah. So, so what we have here is just basically a timing issue and an issue with getting the city staff and LSA to get together for resolving the issues with the contract and presenting it back to the commission for approval. Hopefully within the month of December. So is there any, does anyone have any questions about the contract at this point? That we can give feedback to the administration on. Commissioner Sandberg?
So in reviewing, I looked at didn't really read the two, I read the latest one that you provided, and then kind of the little summary that you provided as well, which were, I and I guess maybe I just need a clarification. Did we draft the lease agreement, provided it to LYSA, and then they had proposed changes, and so that's kind of where we are?
Yes, so the draft went to LYSA in April, so I wasn't really involved in that draft portion of that, but they got it in April. They returned it to us in September. We've been doing our review and sent them a list of questions this Friday. We've been going back and forth over the last few days, and then just going over those issues that we highlighted, so.
And what were the list of questions?
They were provided, they might be in that.
Were they?
Yeah,
Oh,
they were provided.
And they were just, they actually weren't a list of questions so much as a list of changes that had occurred since the last draft.
oh, okay, so yeah, that's what I meant.
Yeah.
So, question I have is the subletting piece.
Mhm.
So, in the summary you provided, you say LYSA changed language and has removed the limit on subletting the facility. What language did we have?
So we've been discussing this afternoon. The intent of the language is that obviously LYSA is going to rent the building out, so it's not that portion of subletting we're concerned about. It's actually turning over the management of the building to someone else.
Okay.
So that's just the limitation we'd like to put on it, is that LYSA has to continue to manage it. And if there's some reason they don't want to, then that would be returned to the city and not subletted to a third party to manage the field house.
Okay. And did, when that was provided back to you from LYSA, was there a reason why they took that out?
Yeah, I think it was just a misunderstanding what subletting was, what we meant by it versus what they meant by it. So we worked through that this afternoon. I don't think it's an issue anymore.
Okay, because I would agree that we don't want subletting to occur, so.
But we do want them to have full range to be able to rent it out for.
Absolutely. I think too, you had a question in regards to insurance amount.
Yes.
Can we get some guidance from MMIA on that?
Actually, we have a question out to MMIA right now. We're waiting for their response. Hopefully we'll get it either tomorrow or Monday on what they recommend for the building. Obviously, we're going to hold the insurance for the structure itself since we own it. And then we're just getting their recommendation on what we should require in the lease for the leasing to be able to hold insurance as well.
For liability.
For liability and any physical damage, if there's a rider, they should have.
Yeah, I would think liability would be a big concern.
It is. Liability is already addressed in the use agreement. I think it's $750,000 per claim and $1.5 million per event, I think is a requirement right now. But we just want to make sure that we shouldn't change that in accordance with the structure itself.
Okay. And then who will be responsible if an entity is going to rent out the facility? Whose responsibility is it to gather that insurance and prove that Livingston is listed as an additional insured?
That'll be LYSA. So when they rent it out, that will be something they need to require from the people they're renting it to.
Okay.
Incorrect.
Excuse me,
Can I,
can
I clarify that?
if you want to clarify something, please come up to the podium, state your name and address for the record.
Jeff Dickerson, 503 North Tech. Sorry to stop. The whole purpose of this agreement is that we don't have to require individuals who want to have a private event up there to get insurance. That's the whole beef behind this whole thing. So
That's right, but you guys are going to be responsible for the insurance. I don't care if
people
they get it.
renting will not have any insurance. That's what this whole thing is about. So it's covered, so they can rent.
So who's going to cover the entity if, I'm going to throw out a scenario, I decide to have my wedding up there. Who's covering the insurance for that then?
Oh, like I said,
And what am I signing with you that says that you are going to cover my liability and not going to come back on me as the person holding the event?
it's already insured for liability. I don't understand your question.
Fairly straightforward question. Something happens at the event and somebody says, well, gee, Sarah, it was your event, we're going after you. And I'm like, well, no, I have insurance through LYSA. What am I getting as that person that proves I'm covered?
Are you talking about the private party that just rented it?
Yeah.
And what did you want?
proof that
If I
you
may.
guys are covering the liability.
That's
Usually,
on file.
usually there is a form or rider that comes along with the rental agreement that states that the liability is covered by, in this case,
Right.
soccer association.
So it'd be like in a use agreement.
I think it would be. I'm
It's a,
assuming.
it's a
correct me if I'm
rental.
wrong.
So if you want to have your wedding there, you would come to LSA. We have a document, that says these are rates, this is the times you can use it for this rate, these are things that you have to do, these are things that are covered, blah, blah, blah. And that would be part of that.
And so you as LISA are gonna assume the liability for whoever rents it.
Well, the insurance company is going to assume liability.
But
That's what we're-
LISA's insurance company.
Correct.
Okay, that's just what I'm trying to clarify.
That's the.
That's not normal. And so that's why I'm just clarifying. Most people don't want to assume other people's liability, so they require the entity who's renting the facility to get their own insurance. So this is a very different approach.
Well, I would disagree with that. There's many situations where this is the type of insurance that covers that, and that's how people rent facilities. For the exact type or example that you are giving.
Right. So if I know from renting other facilities in town that I was required to get a rider myself to cover my own liability. So this is why I'm questioning it, back to my statement, that it seems a little, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just not, and I would look to Jay and Mike to this. I mean, I'm not used to seeing this type of agreement. Usually the person who is renting the facility is assuming the liability. If that's not the case, and LYSA is gonna graciously accept everybody else's liability, is there any type of ramification that could come back to the city for this, or?
No, and that's why I'm agnostic on how they offer the insurance, who's renting it, because our agreement will lay out that they're responsible for any event that they have rented out there. So LYSA will be forced, their insurance company will be forced to cover anything that's there. If they forced the renters to get insurance, that would work as well, but to the city, it makes no difference. The only thing the city is going to be insuring is the actual physical structure itself.
Okay.
And it's the only liability that the city will hold in that case.
Okay. So the questions in regards to the time frame of the proof of insurance, I'm assuming, I mean.
Can I throw a couple things out there real quick? Just because it's going to affect a bunch of these questions. We've already negotiated a bunch of this stuff. We're actually looking to eliminate a bunch of these things. Just because right now the city is very involved in the administration of this, either through the operations committee or bringing things in front of the commission. One of the things we're looking at, going to discuss when we meet next week, is actually just rewriting the use agreement so those things go away and LISA is responsible for most of them on their own. I really don't want to spend staff time in an operations committee to help them schedule the facility because it doesn't really affect the city at all.
Sure.
They should have the full flexibility to be able to do that on their own. So I don't think there's a need for city staff to be on a committee. As well as the fee schedule, once we lease it to them, it's up to them to run their business model and whatever fee schedule they want. I don't think it needs to come back before the commission or to the city administration to approve their fee structure because they'll be responsible for it. If their fees are too high, no one will rent the building and then they'll have to lower their fees. So,
Well, and I guess my proof of insurance was, I was looking at it at the standpoint of LISA providing to the city.
and what we are talking about on that one is instead of having it presented within a certain number of days, just to say that the current insurance must always be on file with the city.
Okay.
So that we always have the current policy. So if they update it, then they're responsible to give us a new copy. And that way we will always have a current copy on file. We can just keep track and make sure that it's current. If for some reason it's expired in our copy, we can say, hey, is this really expired? If it is, then they'll have to get a new one or present us with a new one. So, and we're trying to, one of the things we're looking at is trying to streamline the process and kind of untwine the city. If we're going to rent it to them, then we should let them execute it as they see fit.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're trying to get us out of some of the operations and let them take that over fully.
And so as far as the rent that is stated in the use agreement, is that the rent we're charging LIS what A?
Yes, so that would be what we charge them annually for use of the building. And that's we're still negotiating that.
Okay, because it seemed to be pretty far apart on that one.
So I think we're closer together.
Okay.
Really, right now, the only thing I'm looking at doing is the city is trying to recoup the insurance cost. We provide sewer, we'll provide garbage, provide, I don't know if there's anything else specific we're providing for the building, but.
Water, sewer?
We
Not
provide
water.
sewer, water, they're actually paying for, they're paying their share of electrical as well. We do provide water for the irrigation of the fields,
Irrigation.
but that doesn't apply to the field house. So that number right now from MMI came back at 800, so 800-ish is what we're looking at.
Okay.
But we'll still have to talk about that next week.
Sure. Thank you.
You're welcome. So am I to assume here that the negotiations have resumed and we're working towards a final conclusion within the month of December?
I think we're on track for that.
I think we have a meeting Tuesday at 1 to try to keep this ball moving forward, making progress. Just to go back to Commissioner Sandberg's questions, the whole reason we're doing this is because if we don't do a lease, then we can't get the liability insurance to cover this type of stuff. The other option is then we don't have a lease, we don't have the ability to get the liability insurance, and then we would have to make every single person that wants to use that, whether it's for a 5-person meeting or a wedding, get insurance. And that insurance is pretty expensive because of the high number that is required to have this type of facility. That number that the city manager just put out. That amount of insurance for people that have that coverage in the neighborhood of $500, well, that exceeds their rental rate. So that's why we went about this approach versus making individuals get liability insurance for the day, so to speak.
Is there any other thing you'd like to bring up to the commission before we?
No,
move forward?
I think we had really good discussion. We had some emails back and forth. We shared some information. We had a good visit this afternoon on the phone, and I think that helped move things forward. I think the big thing that OISA wants everybody to understand is that, some of the time restrictions in here, the reason we're so far apart is I think they're not reasonable, or the board of directors of OISA thinks they're not reasonable, because these things just don't happen in 30 days. We don't make decisions to build $750,000 buildings in 30 days, and that kind of stuff. And I think when you look at how slow things move in all of our environments, especially the city, you can't decide in 30 days whether you're going to tear a building down that's damaged or rebuild it, or how you're going to do it that quickly. So you're asking a nonprofit volunteer group to make decisions, which I think the board has said not reasonable. And that's what we're negotiating now, is what's a reasonable time. I guess the example I would give is, look how long it took to decide to remove the house from Sacagawea Park. And it didn't have any damage, right? Well, it was, I guess, but, used up. But these things take processes, and it's a long process. So in order to reinvest in a building that was damaged, takes time, more time than it might in a private entity, house fire or something like that. So the other thing that we didn't get around to is, I guess, we need to also know what that building is being insured for. How much damage is a replacement cost policy or not? Because that would greatly affect these type of decisions for us. And that's something that we have not seen or had that information yet, because of course, it's through, and I think still gathering some of that information at right now. So trying to work all this stuff, because there's many of these pieces to this puzzle, and trying to work them together.
Well, it seems usually that, when you buy building insurance policies, that the policy covers the construction of rebuilding it if it gets damaged. But,
They usually do at the value the building is worth at the time, which is not necessarily full rebuild cost.
Right, yeah.
You can get riders for rebuild cost.
but usually you should check out your homeowners.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
do, no, I do, and they're asking me every single year, do you want to increase the value of your construction or rebuild? So you can always buy it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know,
And I guess that's, if the city's thinking that we're gonna have to pay the insurance on that building through this lease, then we should have that information, what it's insured for, because maybe we don't wanna pay that cost, right? And that's in essence of what this contract is saying is, we're gonna charge you a rental per year based on the cost to insure the physical building for damage or loss. And I think LYSA needs to be involved in that decision and how much that costs, not the city. Because if you're gonna charge us, then we should be part of that decision on how much we want to spend for that insurance. Does that make sense?
It does make sense to a certain degree, yes. In my opinion, I would want to make sure it's insured for a replacement value.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
I would
can't speak
think
for the
because-
board in whole, but I think
No one
that
wants
would be the direction we want to go, yes.
I don't think anyone wants to be out of pocket for anything above what it's insured for,
No.
if it doesn't replace it. Commissioner Sandberg?
But the city owns the building, right?
Correct.
The city can insure it for what it wants.
Well, not if you're gonna charge us for that insurance through a lease. That's not how it works.
Well, actually, yeah, it is how it works, because the lease is a separate issue. What I base the lease price on, I'm currently basing it on insurance, but I don't have to. I could base it on total cost of the city, but I'm not.
Well, I would hope not, since you've gotten a $2.4 million asset for
Well,
virtually
You guys
$1
got a $4 million asset because you're getting full use of it in the lease.
Yeah, so it's your asset, you own it.
Right, which means we have to hold the insurance on it, and if
Correct.
it goes wrong, we're stuck.
Okay, so I think the important thing here is that both organizations are going to work out and come to an equitable agreement and have it before the commission here in December.
That's the goal. Yeah.
Okay, that sounds good. All right, is there any other questions for Mr. Dickerson at all? The only thing, Jeff, point of protocol, don't yell out from the back of the room.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay, I know
I've been to enough of these meetings, sorry.
You get excited and are passionate and, but, you know, I don't want to put any more dents in my gavel here.
There you go.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Yeah, Commissioner Holtman.
So Mike, this is another situation of a use agreement, with a nonprofit, which in our community has been one of our greatest, I think, assets to our community, in that we have nonprofits doing really hard work to get things built that the community can use, everything from children to seniors. It seems like every time we go through the whole discussion on use agreements, it becomes heated. Could you say that we are moving towards maybe a kind of general use agreement way of approaching use agreements for our future, or is this going to be an issue each time it comes up where there's?
Yeah, no, I think because each one is so unique, depending on what it is, it's just the nature of it. As my grandma used to tell me, hard conversations make for good decisions. And I think that's exactly what we need. We need to struggle with it and look at it and make sure it's in everyone's best interest, the community, the nonprofit, the city, all the way around. And those are hard conversations. But if we have them up front and get good agreements before we do stuff, then we have smooth sailing from that point on, because everybody knows exactly what's expected.
I agree. And generally, are we sort of treating each of these entities similarly?
Sure. I mean, everyone's similar, but they're all unique. Like, if you look at the Baseball Association, we do also water their fields, we do that thing, but there's no field house facility, nothing like that. That's we're dealing with. So while we try and be as equitable as possible, you still have to look at each one individually and make sure it still makes sense across the board.
And they want to build a field house like thing, so we might be here again.
Right, and this will be a great blueprint on how to do it. And I think, the fields right now are operating, it's a wonderful asset. They're doing a great job up there. They're super well maintained. That's a great asset to the community. And so I think we just work through the details, and this will be another example of a wonderful agreement once it's done.
Any more questions? Okay. Moving on to action. Thank you very much, OISA members, for coming out tonight. Appreciate it. So we're going to move back to action item A, which is approve city manager's recommendation for amendment 2 to the agreement between owner and engineer for professional services dated February 16, 2016 for the Livingston Water Reclamation Upgrade Project. Mr. Pardes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is brought to you, this is a request from A2S. I want to clarify some of the wording a little bit so we understand exactly what we're talking about. We just did the change order, which was listed as GC1, I believe. This is listed as Amendment 2 because this is not through Dick Anderson Construction. So this is not a part of the construction phase. This is only a part of the engineering, design, and bidding phase. So this is with AE2S specifically, and this is Amendment 2. Amendment 1 was passed, I think in March, last March. Amendment 1 was passed to change some of the requirements for the use agreement. So the engineering and bidding phase is now complete. So this will be, if approved, will be the final amendment for that phase, and then we'll be completely into construction at that point. You can see the request from AE2S on the page 29. I've broken it down for you in a chart, as well as their request letter that shows their entire request and their justification for it. I would like to point out in the first page of their letter, which is on page 30 of the agenda, that they list the total amount of current overages is $357,548. So that's where we started before negotiations with them. Shannon did a few rounds of negotiations. They came out, they did a few rounds of negotiation with me, which is one of the reasons this is coming in and the timing it is we've already gone through several iterations of negotiations with AE2S. Their final number that they came down to was $271,000, broken down into those areas. I've also provided what the public works, Shannon and I have gone through, and what we think is actual fair compensation in those areas. That is on the right. So you can see their total was $271,000. We agreed with them mainly in the fund pursuit procurement area that was additional cost to them, as well as 2/3 of the procurement of the MPVS permit. The design contingencies, we didn't come to a good agreement on that. We thought that a lot of that should have been in the original design, and so we don't feel that they deserve the full $120,000 on that. However, the bidding requirements did change after the original amendment, and so we agreed that was a fair amount to provide to them for that. So our total is $180,000, and then below you can see the impact on the overall project. The starting contingency is listed there for you. You can see change order G1 is there for the $70,000 that we approved in the last meeting, and then if Amendment 2 was approved, you can see the remaining contingency right now is $734,000. Also, just point of clarification, you may have noticed the last change order was in consent items. Well, this one is an action item. I drew an arbitrary line of $100,000. If it's below that, considered less than 1/2 of 1% of the total budget. But if it's above that, then I'll bring it to you as an action item. If you'd like to see a different cutoff for that, just let me know, and I will schedule accordingly.
Thank you very much. All right, so mission questions and clarification. Mr. Sandberg.
Well, if you insist.
I know you were holding off there.
All right, I'm just going to start by saying, personally, I would request to have more time, at least till the next meeting, to because I want to review the original contract that we signed and try to determine how the language was presented that equates to these type of changes, and we just didn't have the time to do that. So for myself to feel I'm truly doing my due diligence, I would just request that, we can continue our discussion and ask our questions this evening, but perhaps do an action at the next meeting once we've had a time to review and digest and maybe ask some more questions to yourself or et cetera for clarification. So I did have I received the letter, and obviously we sat down with the negotiations, so you have more detail. It's a little ambiguous in the fact that we're not equating man hours, we're not equating, I'm not used to seeing something just summarized. I'm used to saying, hey, we put in X amount of hours at this amount per hour, and this is how we came up with why it costs us this much. Do you have that information?
There was that information to start with. Because we negotiated a lot of it, it didn't become a one-to-one equation. If you wanted to go all the way back to 357,000, they started with that information, and then once we started, I'd say shaving money off here and there, then it's not a direct correlation anymore.
But the ones that you agree on, they should equate to the same hours that they provided, correct?
Yeah, I think, I don't know, do we still have that sheet, Shannon? That was a long time ago, I don't remember.
I didn't bring my whole package, but we've gotten a lot of information from Scott.
We can dig it up in someone.
Yeah, if you could, and then if would the other commissioners be interested in seeing how they came up with these numbers as well?
I would.
Okay.
Yeah, I would too.
Also, if you can describe, there's the four amendments, and if you could clarify for me why this is considered an increase to what was signed in the original contract, and what exactly did they do under each of these that was additional work?
Okay, so for talking the 4 areas of funding pursuit.
Yeah.
And so the funding pursuit procurement is mostly related to some TSEP, but it's mostly related to the USDA RD grant. I don't remember back to when we originally did this, the city was going to handle that, and we eventually turned it over to A2S because of the complexity and the time that it was taking. So we started, I think, out with our grant writer and shifted to 82S, so that's why that was an increase.
Don't remember that.
So I think that was.
Oh, I'm sorry. What?
May I ask a
Absolutely.
follow-up question on that? So if that was something that wasn't in the original contract, and then we asked them to do that, why not at that time? Why not at that time did they not let us know that it was going to be more money?
They did let us know it was going to be more money. We just didn't know how much more money at that time. Just because of this is actually related on the man hours that it actually took to get done.
Okay.
I don't.
So what's the time frame here? Thank you very much, Commissioner Semper.
Yeah.
So what is the time frame here? If the only date that we have here is February 16, 2016. Was that the time when they originally finished billing us for services?
So which February 16th are you looking at?
Well, it says, approve city manager's recommendation for amendment 2 in order to professional services on the legislative summary dated February 16th, 2016. So is that the first time that came before us for approval?
That's the date of the professional services contract.
That's the date the contract was made.
Yes.
And about what date did we ask them to do the USDA stuff?
I have to go back and look at all those things. So there was the original award of the professional services contract, which was in March of 16. Is that right? February of 16 was, and then there was Amendment 1, which was in March of 2017. So this is the 3rd time this has come before you.
Oh, for an amendment?
This is the 2nd amendment. So there was the original one in February of 16. There was Amendment 1 in March of 17, and now this is Amendment 2.
Okay.
If I can clarify what you're saying. So I think why would they assume services that they didn't know they were going to get paid for? Why would they not have, I'm trying to understand why they didn't seek approval and say, hey, this is going to cost you extra money, and you say that we did know. I'm not exactly sure that we did. I mean, maybe the administration did. I'm not sure the commission did. But why wouldn't, I've never known to do work hoping that I'm going to get paid.
In this case, I have done that before. It's not a lot of fun. In this case, I think the March amendment, we started addressing the USDA, but we didn't address the procurement. We addressed the construction management portion of the USDA fund. So there's services going on right now that they do week to week based on USDA requirements. That was addressed in Amendment 1. There was an additional amount of money for that. When they actually took over the funding pursuit procurement in the planning phases, I couldn't give you a date on that. Do you know that off the top of your head, Shannon? When they actually take over the grant portion in the planning phase, in the design phase?
Well, just a little history on it. It wasn't until March of 2016 that the city realized that we were eligible for USDA. If you go back to 2012 and 13 and look at the preliminary engineering report and look at funding options for this project, USDA has not been included. So through the TSEP application, which we were awarded the $625,000, we were notified that our community was eligible based on poverty limits and what our sewer rates were inside of the project. So they started work on the USDA grant in the spring of 2016.
So who approved them to do that work? And how did we not clarify that that was or was not in the scope of the original contract?
And that was a year before I got here, I don't know for sure.
Well, I need to know the answer to that. How that process happened, that we're asking somebody to take on additional work, and what's the discussion of who's going to pay for that, and where that discussion was provided to the commission.
So I know some of that discussion happened in the March timeframe that I sent you today. So there are some of that discussion is in there. I don't know if it all is in there or not. Because I know that was the only time between then and now that the commission was brought an amendment for the A2S contract itself. And some of the USDA funding is in there, but it was only for the funding administration. So it was USDA funding administration. As far as when they took over the procurement portion of it, I don't have a record of that.
And who made the decision that they would take over the procurement?
I could try and find that out, but I don't have it at my fingertips right now.
Because I'm trying to understand is if these change orders are the act of the administration or the act of the commission at how they materialized. And, you know, to be provided with $200 and some odd of change orders with an engineering firm that I know I don't understand. I don't understand the information, and I don't remember the conversations ever happening that was giving us a heads up or providing us that this was coming down the pipeline. So I guess besides being very frustrated, I'm just trying to understand where these conversations happened, that we knew this was gonna come down the pipeline. Are we truly responsible for having to pay these if they provided additional work without solidifying that we would pay for it in advance, which would be my next question. And perhaps how do we stop this from happening again, that we're not communicated to of these proposed changes in a contract?
I think that part we've already taken care of. I think you are now given that information ahead of time, as can be witnessed by the last change orders. We're trying to give you that information as early as we can.
No, well, but it's not with this, the one we're talking about right now.
That is true. This timing on that one is obviously not in the last 6 months.
I think if everybody recalls, I mean, AE2S gave updates to the city commission every 2 or 3 months throughout the whole design process. As with the TSEP application, I mean, requirements of those grants, we had to have public workshops, and I'm confident that the information was brought in front of the commission on pursuing the USDA. Now, there was a formal motion that would have been made when we actually accepted the agreement for accepting USDA loan grant. But pursuing the work was something that was, it was my understanding that we were all on the same page and we knew what the benefits of the USDA loan over 40 years at a low interest rate and the grant possibility. So I think the intention was, it was a highly complex, very tedious process to go through USDA. Because of the technical ability or the aspect of this project, it was better off to have AE2S and their staff do the grant review.
I don't think there's any debate on the USDA grant. I don't think we were provided what it was going to cost us to have a chain, because we had a grant writer who was working on this, and then all of a sudden we didn't have a grant writer. And so, or we had a grant writer, but we were asking the engineering firm to do this. I guess I'm not aware that we were told to pursue the USDA grant is going to cost us X in additional fees by the engineering firm. Go ahead, James.
No, I think that's the only question, really.
Okay.
I mean, no, that's the question I have as well. I mean, I think we're aware of all the grants that we're applying for. I think that what at least I wasn't aware of, or I don't remember being aware of, that someone was assigned another task that was going to cost the city more for doing this project. I think that's the only question here with probably all these.
Yeah, I would agree, James, that it's, you know, again, maybe the administration had these discussions with engineering firms, but I don't remember us being provided that, by the way, we're making these changes and this is what it's going to cost us to have the engineering firm do it in addition to what we're already paying them. And of course, I could be wrong, but if somebody can provide the notes, I guess, you know, that would clear that up.
What I can, sorry,
Okay, go ahead.
what I can provide are the two contracts that came before the commission and the USDA decision that came before the commission. There is a resolution on the USDA, use of the USDA. To go back and figure out when or what exactly was given to the commission on this, I don't know if there are going to be any records that would state that. In fact, I would doubt that there's any. You know, we can go through each of the commission meetings or any of the updates to see what the commission was told, but I don't think there was probably an active decision by the commission at any point on the cost.
Yeah.
But I can tell you the cost that I'm recommending, they did the work. And it wasn't in the original scope. Those two things I can tell you because I looked at the original contract and I looked at what they did. So giving this amount of money is fair. If we feel that because they didn't get approval beforehand, we don't want to give them the money, that's our choice. But the amount of money I've recommended is fair compensation for the work that they did. I'm not trying to say that you guys knew ahead of time or that you approved it. I'm just saying the recommendations are appropriate compensation for the work that they accomplished.
Commissioner Sandberg, if I may, with another commissioner, bring up some questions for clarification. Do you yield?
Well, no, I mean, I guess why is it that we get asked to approve something after the fact? If we're not engaged in the conversation, then I mean, if it's something that we ultimately are asked to decide and approve, then we need to be engaged in the conversations prior. How can we possibly make a decision on decisions made between administration that's costing us extra money beyond the budget? And yes, we have a contingency, but that doesn't mean you have to spend it. So it's terribly frustrating, and it seems to happen frequently. And I want to understand how this stops happening. If it's a decision that we have to make, we need to be informed at the impetus of the conversation. And I guess I would look for support from the other commissioners to make that happen.
Commissioner Sandberg, I would
Yes.
agree that I think we need to be informed before we expend the money and commit the money. I think that's a given. And as far as your question goes about how do we keep that from happening, I think that part is another discussion item here. But what I'd like to do, and we can come back to any other clarifications you have, is to allow some other commissioners to bring up some points as well, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Vogel?
I agree, Sarah, in that having knowledge of the changes before the change would be what I would like to see, so that the overall big picture changes, then we can support or not. But as far as the funding pursuit and procurement, I do recall the multiple, and Shannon, you had mentioned a little bit on this, but I recall when we switched it, and it was brought to us that we're switching from city-run procurement in particular. So I'm just kind of focused here on the top. Yeah, the first line item, funding, pursuit, and procurement, versus the others, because I still have questions. I'd like to understand exactly what they mean and what the money went towards. But in this case, I recall and remember, I don't remember the amount of money that they requested, but it was a discussion in the commission during a presentation as to what the role was of the engineering firm as far as the funding. So I can see myself supporting that first line item because of knowing that we had switched from the city running it to the engineering. So just focus on that one. As far as the other ones, I don't know if anyone has anything else to say on funding for certain procurement line item, but I'd like more information on the others as well, whenever we're ready.
And can I ask Joel a question?
Yes.
Or pardon me?
Commissioner Sandberg.
So without knowing how they derived $56,000, you're okay with that number?
I'm okay with supporting that we need to pay them. I would like to know the detailed number. I'm supporting that they did the work. I recall the conversations that went from that time to this time to support them doing the work. But I would like to know exactly what this means in numbers, just like you asked.
Okay, so you're okay with the concept, but not necessarily the dollar figure
Well, and
until you see the data behind it.
well, and I'm also making the assumption that you've looked at the dollar figures as well. I would like more information, more history behind it, more weeks of discussion, so that we know exactly what the numbers are. But I do know that I can support the funding pursuit and procurement line item, the amount. I don't understand yet, and that's where I'd like us to.
I guess so. For background information on that, do you want the actual spreadsheets that show the hour by hour breakdown? Do you want just the roll up of manpower costs? I mean, this is all procurement. This is all going to be man-hour costs. That's all it is. You just want the total number of hours worked. Do you want a breakdown of what each hour went to? I mean, how much granularity do you want in this detail?
Well, I just did some what was the grant? 1.7 million.
Yeah.
I mean, $56,000 for 1.7 grant just seems.
And a $5 million loan.
It just seems awfully high. I mean, if it was $200 a man hour.
Well, USDA changed their requirements twice during the process, so we actually accomplished the process 3 times. So if that's a third, then that's reasonable. Yeah, because of it went over a fiscal year, USDA changed the requirements. I mean, there was any USDA related to anything is brutal. Even now, there's weekly telecons to meet USDA's requirements. There is a significant amount of man hours that went into it. I mean, so I guess the question is for you. You say you want more detail. How much detail do you really want? Do you want to break down hour per hour? Do you want to roll up with just the man hours? What can I get you that will fit your needs?
For me, man hours and rate per hour. But also, I guess, for me, that would be the data I would want. And what are the communications that they're coming to you or administration saying, we'll do this, but it's going to cost you. What are those communications? Where were they? And what did they share and at what time?
I can definitely get you the first. I don't know if I can get you the second, just because I wasn't here. But
well, there should be records.
I doubt there's records on. Most of it was probably done over conversations or sit-down meetings. Or even if it was a spreadsheet or a Word document, the chances of finding it are slim from past city manager files. But I can try and find that kind of documentation. But I know I can get you the man hour breakdown. That's easy.
Well, I think it's just kind of, if administration's having these conversations, how it's going to increase what has been approved by the commission, why they would not keep documentation on those conversations, knowing that they're going to have to go to the commission to get approval for those increases, is concerning to me. And I'm not sure how my other fellow commissioners feel about it, but I'm just not sure how we're expected to vote on things when we don't have the information of the conversations, why they're happening, and the dollar figure associated with them. I'll just go on record and say it's insulting to have this presented to me.
This is insulting?
Yes.
If I may,
That's just my opinion and how I feel, but it's insulting.
if I may, I think as this conversation's progressing, I think that we're understanding that the present administration wasn't involved in most of these decisions, at least for the first one. Right. So it's good. I agree with you. They're really, at this point, for this amount of money, the request is a lot. It seems like there's a disconnect between the commission and the administration and the engineering company, because something was lost there that we were unaware. I know that we talked about USDA, but I know we never talked about costs. I know we never talked about, well, this is being transferred to them, they're going to do it now, and what that meant to us. I mean, if someone said that, it wouldn't even occur to me to say, well, that sounds great. I'm assuming that it's already within their contract scope.
Exactly.
So,
can I just make one point of clarification about when you said it was before the administration?
Sure.
It was before the city manager. We did have an administrative team that obviously did have these communications that is still on staff. And I think that those people should be held accountable to provide the information of whatever type of decisions and contracts they made with these entities. I mean, we
well,
can't
I
just.
think what we should try to do is, at least for, here's my opinion, at least if we need, I understand the role that the present administration has gone through to write up the recommendation. And I'm sure it sounds fair given the amount of man hours that were provided, but I think that's not the point, or that's not the point of the concern, at least from this, Commissioner. The point of concern is that at this time we're asked to pay these funds as a second amendment when somewhere along the line we were informed that we were going to, have these extra costs. So I'm assuming the administration and staff move these processes forward. Either thinking that we didn't need some type of cost to go along with those, or just going to see what the cost came out at the end. I'm not quite sure how to state that, but that's the problem. It's not that they didn't do the work and the work doesn't deserve to be compensated, or the work isn't value and the work didn't produce, millions of dollars for the city. It's just the disconnect between the commission and the administration to understand why we're asked to pay these things when we weren't informed that there were going to be these extra costs. I know there's always contingencies, but this is just another contingency that seems excessive. Commissioner Schwartz.
Yeah, I want to add that, the estimated 500 hours of, out of scope time has gone into this. I would think when the problem arose, something's got to trigger and say, hey, we're going to get into a significant cost overrun here. And, we need a mechanism to trigger, hey, you need to bring this before the commission instead of before it gets out of control, before the 500 hours are spent. I don't want to micromanage this project, but it's also, it's a very complex project. I understand that. But I'm looking at stuff, throughout here, and I'm seeing stuff that should have been part of the scope. It should have been in the design process. I know it's, 5,000 here, 10,000 there, but I mean, for the overall facility, if I was bidding that, engineering it, I would have looked at all that.
Well,
But that's that's small potatoes there, but just all of a sudden we're at 500 hours. They're at 500 hours. Wow, I think I want to give the commission heads up, that this is what we're incurring if I'm design, if I'm A2S. Instead of investing 500 hours and negotiating down, what do we have, 2 years to go on this project yet?
You're hopefully no more than 18 months.
Yeah, okay, 18 months. Right.
So I guess the wrap.
No, I
the wrap
guess,
up
yeah,
is just. Oh, are you?
No, I'm done.
Okay. I guess to kind of consolidate the concerns, is there anything that the commission or the administration can hear from the administration at all as far as not how we got here, but
Yeah.
can we, how we got here, but
Well,
what's A2S's excuse for all this at this time for that amount?
okay, did you read, so,
I read the whole thing.
okay, so, I mean, they broke down exactly what they are asking for.
I'm not worried about what they're asking for. I know what they're asking for. My concern is that they're asking for it way after the fact. And that that's a lot of extra money to be asking for once the contract has been in place. And somehow, I'm just wondering, I understand them, read these, I circle them, I see all the costs. But so the overriding question I kept having is, why so much at this point now? Why are we getting this bill now?
So this is the wrap up or the completion of the entire design phase. So that's why this is all grouped together in the plan. This is the end of the design and bidding process. So I guess, let me break it out into, so I understand exactly what you want. Let me break it out into each one of these things. Is there how many of these things do we have a concern on that it wasn't worth the money? Because I want to break it between process and items.
I don't think that's the question.
Yeah, it's not,
Well, that's an important question to me though, as the administration.
I would need to know again how they calculated it. So I'm not, I mean, I'm not just going off a blank dollar figure and say, is it worth it or not? I mean, if they, I have to understand how they came up with the values that they did.
Okay, so you just want to break down the man hours for each item.
Well, that's what I would request.
Does that meet the needs of the entire commission? Is there more that you need? I mean, because that's really what I want to get out of this, is breaking down exactly what you're looking for. Because it's obviously I'm not meeting what you're looking for, so we need to figure out what it is you exactly want to see.
What would be exactly what, if you had to make this decision, what would you want to see? I mean, that's what you need to provide for us. So to me, it's
Well, that's
the
actually the
breakdown of the
question. Do you want to
cost.
see everything that I see?
If we need something that understands, and I don't know what you have seen, so I can't answer that question. We need a breakdown for me, how they derive these figures. Where was the communication on each of these entities to the administrative team? Apparently, we failed to keep the information, but perhaps the engineering firm kept it and maybe they have that information. So when did those discussions happen? I would also like to know then why, when those discussions happened, it was not provided to the commission. And provided, and the decision instead was to give us a lump sum at the end of the project. So those are the three entities that I would look for. That's myself. The other commission may want different information.
Does anyone else want any more information before we make this decision? Commissioner Holman?
So I want the breakdown, and Sarah, you said this, but I want to say it again. Breakdown from AE to, as to how they came up with that blanket amount of 56,000.
And how much granularity in that?
For me, I want to know, okay, this cost, I'm not so much about the, okay, per hour thing, but whenever you have a contractor, they say, or a designer, they say this is broken down by $70 an hour for this process, blah, blah, blah. But it's kind of a general statement as to how the money is used. Okay, I don't need the detailed thing, but if others want it, I'm fine with that. But I do want to know where they came up with this number. 56 is about as general, 56,000 is general as you can get. It means nothing to us. I would like to know why that money is needed to be, or
Why the cost of it?
why is it costing that? Why is it that,
So if they say,
went to that?
to just get you out, because I want to make sure we're getting exactly what you need. So if they say we spent 500 hours on this, then that's what it costs. You need to know, how much you need to know, like, you break down how many hours were spent on forms, something like how, so if they just say, hey, it's 500 hours, now.
At so many dollars an hour when we do funding pursuits, yeah. That, I would be fine with that. I don't know what others think.
Jerome, can I ask one quick question on that? What did they submit to you that says you owe us 56,000?
So we went through, we've been doing this for a couple months now. So, I mean, we've gone back and forth with a bunch of documents, but we went all the way from that granular hour and then rolled it up and then walked our way through the whole thing. So if you guys want all of that information, that's fine. I can get it to you, but it's hundreds of pages of information. I don't know if that's what you're looking for. So my attempt was
They didn't
to,
include the 100 pages worth of information in the bill as well, for the amount of time it took them to do that.
so, well, I mean, it's just their spreadsheets that they maintain, right? Like they maintain a spreadsheet so they can do billable hours just like everybody.
You can email it to me. If they've got it on a disk, I'd be happy to look at it.
But is that what you want presented in the agenda?
Why doesn't everyone let the city manager know what they're looking for? Quinn?
Oh,
Excuse me.
oh, yeah, that's right.
Correll had the
Oh,
right.
sorry, Jerome.
So I know you're going to approach this, but it's very important to me. You already stated that you were going to clarify the request, their request versus your request in a sense, or the city's request. So, or your recommendation, I'm sorry, wrong word. So I would like to know theirs versus ours as a city and where you came up with that number, and why you're supporting it. And recommending that we do have this as an overage that we support. But I do want to see that comparison. And I have a feeling that you were going to explain some of it to us, but we're not at that place right now. And then, I guess last thing is I feel comfortable if we had a breakdown of costs overall per hour, however we cover that, I'm going to leave that up to you and how you present that to us, but as much of that information as possible. But I definitely want to do the comparison in detail.
Are you done?
For now.
Go
I
down
lost
there.
some of my track.
Commissioner
Want
Short?
to just go down the line?
No, do you have any requests at all?
Yeah, I guess I wanna know the date that all this started. When did this all start? And what's the normal procedure as you go along? Yes, this is what I'm talking about. Yeah, we have to have a beginning of all this and who they were talking to and how it progresses. How does a day look? You know, you got a project going and what happens? They need more hours or something, or did they talk to somebody? Or we just on a piece of paper, we need more hours, 50 hours. So I see this as a procedure thing, you know, when did it all start? How does it progress along? What's it look like? And when I read the thing, I was, wow. I mean, I was dizzy just reading about it. So how you break it all down makes sense for it. So, you know, I've been involved in a lot of large projects, and as you go along, and you're in a rough position because one is the start of this thing. So there's got to be some paperwork or some guidance. When this all started, how it progressed, what did it look like at a certain point, and how does it work? I'm a contractor, and I know I got to do some. Do I talk to somebody in the city before I start? Do I give somebody a piece of paper? Do I write something? We've got to do this. I guess that's my procedure I'm looking for. The starting point and what happened.
And I'll echo those sentiments exactly. That's what I mean. You know, where is there, you know, the trigger here? Hey, the firm's got to come to somebody in administration and say, hey, look, we got some problems here. We're going to be going over on this. And how do we get it in a timely fashion? I'm not sure how to do that, but again, I don't want to micromanage this, but I don't every other meetings, you know, be eaten away at the contingency. You know, I know it's there. Doesn't mean we have to spend it. As Sarah said, because you know they put a significant amount of time in this. I appreciate what Mike has done for us negotiating stuff like that. That's all. This is all probably, you know, well and good and fair and everything. But it's the timeliness, I guess. You know, it's after the fact, and then I've got to go back, you know, to my kitchen and say, well, what the hell? What are you guys doing? You know, and just, yeah, I'm frustrated at that point too. But you know, like what Mel said, you know, I mean, I've been a contractor. I'm going to the homeowner. Hey, if I see a potential problem or something, you know, here's a heads up. I estimate, have an idea this is going to, what you're going to incur cost wise. You know, you can tell them picky we are as a commission. We can pick the department. Otherwise, 'cause I don't want to have to go through all the minutia. Like, that's a part-time job. I mean, that's why we put our faith into the, administration. And, so I think we'd work better at that, at getting us the information, before the fact. Thank you. I yield.
Yeah,
Say something?
Yes.
Just, sorry. In this letter from the engineering firm, so Clinton in relationship to what you're saying, as a contractor, they put out a bid and base their bid on information that they gather and their knowledge. And sometimes when costs go above that, they have to swallow it and swallow the cost versus, if you're a contractor and, the roofing company says one thing and they're the experts, they should have a pretty firm amount of money. And if it goes way above, it has to be somewhat their responsibility too, because like in this letter, the second to last paragraph, in retrospect, this was insufficient given the as yet to be identified design requirements. Okay, yeah, but we shouldn't have to cover every single retrospect idea or unexplained or unplanned or whatever.
Right, and that's why the recommendations for half of what they're asking, which was less than they actually.
There is one caveat here. DEQ's involved in this, pretty heavy. And we know all about that.
Yeah.
And, you give something and you're based on the knowledge we have now. And then all of a sudden you find out, well, that's not the way it is today. So DEQ is a huge part of this. Every time you did something, it was another, you can't do that anymore. So I understand the frustration all the way around, but as I read that, that's what I saw every time. We based on what we know today, this is the way we approach it, but then all of a sudden there's a roadblock from DEQ. We got burned in DEQ many times here. So they're one of the culprits in this thing.
sure. The only flip side to the DAQ question is they gave us a lot of money too in this process. But I think, just to summarize, everyone's said their main concern. My main concern now after talking through this is, I'd like to hear from A, E, to S. At what point did they recognize that they were going to go over bid? At some point, they're keeping track of hours. When I provide a bid to someone for a hard cost, and if I see I'm going over hours, before I reach that point, I'm looking at those hours and I say, hey, I'm going to go over hours. This is why. Is there anything we can work out, or can I add to this bid, or do you want me to stick to this bid and keep the rest of the cost? And that's the basic principle I see here. At some point, they knew that they're going to go over cost.
Okay, so I think we're mixing terms here, because there was no bid for USDA procurement. That was not in the original bid. So they didn't ever go over bid. This was an additional item. This was out of scope.
Well, on that one, but the rest of them?
Nope. Actually, most of the other things were also out of scope or additions. The MTDS permit was an additional requirement.
Okay, so then the administration made the request.
Yeah, I'm assuming that is what happened.
So I think what this commission needs to know is at what point the administration made the request. And was there at some point, someone has to know. At some point did they say, yes, that's fine, we'll pay those costs? Someone had to be responsible for that.
Yes.
So that's what I need to know, and I think that's what everyone else is asking for too.
To follow up on that,
Yes.
does the administration have the authority to do that when you're asking us to approve it?
So it seems to me that the change orders have to be approved by the commission. So those decisions should be made by the commission, not the administration.
Would it push up contract management to the commission?
I'm not talking about contract management. If you're going above and beyond the scope, I mean, if you were in charge of contract management, this wouldn't come before the commission. This is a commission decision. The commission approves these contracts. So that means that the authority to go above and beyond what has already been allocated is, the administration does not have the responsibility to do that.
Well,
But this is an important point that I think we need to make sure.
It is, because I don't want, I get paid enough to manage it.
no,
I'm not asking to manage it, but it would be the responsibility of the administration to come to the commission and say, by the way, we need these things done. And this is the entity we have to do them. Here's a guesstimate of what it's gonna cost, so we're aware. Do we wanna go ahead and go forward with it?
I think that's what we're asking.
That's
Isn't it?
what I'm asking
Yeah.
for. So if the administration can't make a promise and allocate funds to an entity and then come to ask us to approve it after they've already told them that they're going to pay it,
No, and they're not. Right.
that's what this is.
We
So-
have to approve it. He's
so is
negotiating
that in
for us.
essence what you're telling us? Is that the administration at some point approved this work to be done without any idea what it was gonna cost?
I don't think that's true. Again, I wasn't there, I don't know, but I doubt that there was no idea. I mean, if you look at each one of these either resulted in significant cost savings to the city or significant additional capability of the plant.
Understood
Yeah, I
perfectly.
see
I
that.
got that from the report.
So-
Nobody's arguing that.
Well, but I think even if you understand the cost, that is a valid use of the money. If you look at some of these things, so then I guess the question becomes, at what point does the commission want to become involved with what? If you look at each one of these things, when would you have expected to be brought into it and in what manner? Because if we do all of this through the commission, there will be some time penalties that are associated with preparing it, getting it to the commission, making a decision, which may cause problems in the execution,
Yeah, there's gonna be a time cost to it, but
which is the
it
money
doesn't,
cost.
it doesn't, I don't think it necessarily, to be aware, of an additional cost.
Be aware or approve.
Well,
If you're
I
asking
think,
us
I
to
think if
approve,
you have a bid out with a company and we get the contract for approval, goes ahead with it. And then we assign 5 more tasks to them and we know it's gonna cost. At that point, that company should say, you gave us 5 more costs. We're gonna give you a new bid. Please get that approved. Is that unreasonable?
I'm not sure that's the contractor's job, but if that's what you want from the administration, we can do that. And that's really what we're trying to dig at, is what do you want to see when? And how early in the process? and
Well, it's
what point
very
do you want to
difficult
make
for
a
us to even give you that direction because we don't know when any of this happened.
But
I
don't think we need to know when it happened to know when you would like to know about it, like just where in the process.
to me, as soon as if it's something we have to approve. I mean, we have to approve this by our codes. You as an administration can't approve it, it has to come to the commission. So if it's something we're gonna be asked to vote on, give us a heads up. By the way, we're going to incur these additional expenses for X, Y, Z. Start the discussions there. At least we're aware of it. To me, that's very simple. I mean,
Sure, but it
in the
sounds like
cons-
some of that happened already with the USDA funding.
Again, they talked about the funding, they didn't tell us it was gonna cost us extra money. The administration didn't say, by the way, this is out of scope for the current contract, so this is gonna cost us extra money. That was not disclosed. The construction projects that I've been involved in that have been more than this, you have a construction manager, you have an engineer, I mean, we're paying these guys to be construction managers as well. It's their responsibility to come to make the report to the board when something changes. Do we need to know
exactly how many paper clips it's gonna take them to do it, or how many pieces of rebar to do it, no. But the communication needs to be, hey, this is gonna cost you extra money. Do you wanna go ahead and go do this? This is the cost benefit analysis of it. You're gonna get this out of it, but it's gonna cost you this. To me, it's very simple. And it was something that I've done 5 major construction projects from the ground up, from buying the land to the finished building. And so the fact that we're having this discussion, I guess, kind of confuses me, because it's a simple process I've always followed in with construction and been aware of in my entities that I work with.
Well, I look back, couldn't analyze why we're here. I mean, I look back through all the commission meetings I could find. I didn't find any examples of what you're talking about. So if this is a process you want, this is a new process. It's not something that's been done to this point, at least not that I've ever seen in the research I've done. Is this something that has happened in the past?
Well,
I'm
I
not
would-
sure what you mean by a new process. The overall entity is if we're asked to make a decision, we have to
I don't disagree with you on that.
know that.
I completely agree with you. My point is I base what I give to you off of what's been given to you in the past.
I would recommend not doing that.
Well, you gotta start somewhere. I mean, that's, it's what we have to work with at this point.
I mean, when we're looking at, when we look at like, street work, they come back with a contingency. Or an additional cost that's gonna fit into the contingency. We have the money because it's in there. That bid has to do with, they had a bid for X project, they're working on X project, they run against X problem, it's gonna cost X amount of money, and that's gonna go against the contingency. Now, correct me if I'm misunderstanding this, is that they had a contingency, but it wasn't enough. And now we're taking this out of the construction contingency.
Well, we rolled this into one big conglomeration when we did the USDA model. So it's now one entity. There aren't separate phases.
There are design phases.
I mean, that's how we did it originally. But when we rolled in USDA funding, we rolled it all into one big contingency, one big project.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna make a motion that we table this till the next meeting and continue it then. Because I think we gotta clear our minds and really take a look at this. I mean, I understand the present administration's perspective on this, and, you know, the hard work you already went through negotiating to get to this point, and we really appreciate that. I don't think, at least for myself, I'm speaking for myself now, I don't think I'm so much concerned about the costs as to the process, how we got to this point, and what possibilities there may be in the future to know that once we, somewhere in the process, we assign someone more work, that, you know, we're either informed or brought into the loop of understanding that, hey, we're gonna see, you know, the scope of work was way out of line, and now we're gonna have some costs coming back to us in 2 or 3 months in regards to that. You know, I have to clear my mind, I have to give some thought about how to look at this and see how we can figure out how we can avoid this in the future. I'm not sure if I have an answer for that or if there is an appropriate answer at this point. So I don't feel comfortable voting on this until until personally I know that answer.
So let me ask this question. The current update process, have you found that sufficient?
Give me an example.
For its progress.
For this project?
You mean them coming in and telling us about the progress on the progress?
And including the progress reports and the weekly reports. Is that
I think-
sufficient?
Yeah, I don't think that's the question.
Well, it's part of the question. It's part of making sure I get you the information you need.
Yeah,
And that's, so,
If
because,
there's gonna be changes, I mean, yeah, for somebody to come in and talk about something is one thing.
But like you were talking about, you're negotiating on this for 2 months. You know, we're not aware of that. So, you know, the engineer's not coming in here and saying, oh yeah, everything's, and, you know, whether they're wearing their engineering hat or the construction manager hat at the time, who knows? But they're not saying, oh yeah, and by the way, we submitted all these change orders into it. So I would say the information you're providing us is good, but if, I just don't understand why we're not given the additional information. I mean, if you're negotiating change orders, I want to know about it. I don't want to be presented with something after the fact that says, here's an additional $270,000 out of contingency. And this is the first you've heard of it.
So is that
Go ahead.
is that a question of telling you I'm doing the negotiations, or was that an earlier problem where the changes actually occurred in the work?
I would like to know what changes are happening that are gonna, whether, I mean, what changes are happening, and more importantly, what changes are happening that could potentially cost us money.
Obviously, some of that's going to be unknowable upfront. Some of it will be.
Absolutely.
I mean, not everything's going to be knowable upfront. Obviously, overruns are just overruns, cost increase, accidents, whatever. And if we're talking, I can definitely see on some of this where if you did not know we made a change, and again, I don't know how that worked, but if you didn't know that we decided to recycle the batch reactors, it's probably something that could have been presented. Now, I don't know if that's presented in a, is that a resolution? Is that an action item? Is that just so that we can report?
Information.
Yeah,
I mean,
I understand what Michael's trying to say. He's trying to codify this into a system that can, that the administration can manage and present so that, you know, if we are asking for an additional step, then he'll know what that is. My suggestion really is that there's a lot of things we've gone through and we've worked through and brainstormed through here tonight. I say we take this up again next meeting. Give us some time to all think about it and really look at it in more detail. If the administration wants to provide any more information that would help clarify things for us, listening to the confusing discussion we've had tonight, and at least should give you some time to do that. And then when we come back at the next meeting, we can look at this and make a, you know, the best decision we can based on the information we have at that point. You know, the only thing I'd like to add is, before we close up this discussion, unless someone else has any, but the only thing I'd like to add is that this problem isn't new. This is an ongoing problem. I believe that Livingston Healthcare is trying to we're in a legal process, so we can't really say a lot. But it's the same situation there. Their project was not managed, and now we have, you know, overages that they're looking for a compensation. So we've been through this before. So let's take a couple weeks to the next meeting and get some more information and rethink this. Commissioner Holman?
Here's, talking with my hands a lot, sorry.
We had the mics up close.
What if we propose, you're asking for what can we do differently to answer this? What if we propose that, I feel this is such a big project, so expensive, a worry for the community as far as the cost of it in general. What if we had commission updates at each meeting, just a general commission update to us in the community as to where the process is, or some of the major things going on within the process. So that, I know you do give us a war report, but what if we just had a few minute update on this project in particular? And then I can see that happening in the downtown as well, just when that starts, even if it's out for bid or what, you know, where are things in the process, just so that we're informed. And it doesn't have to be yeah, comprehensive or super detailed, but at least some of these things, like the 2 months of discussions, we might have known about a little bit, and that could have been a simple place to address it or state it. I don't know what you guys think.
To me,
Commissioner Sandberg?
sorry, you know, we're paying an above market value for the construction manager. I would think that that would be their responsibility, is to provide at least monthly, if not at each meeting, but monthly, a status report of the project. And again, it's common sense. Here's a pitfall, here's gonna be an extra expense, here's what went wrong, here's what went great, here's where we saved money. I mean, it's pretty simple. But I would put them to work, we're paying them a lot of money.
Anything else?
He's got to do it for his bosses.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, he already has to provide it to the boss, so just have him send our copy over whatever he provides to his boss.
Well, we get that weekly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a detailed report of where they're at. We can send that on to you if you're interested in.
And the main thing, it's the, what costs are we gonna incur? That's what everybody worries about. That's what everybody's gonna ask me. You know, why, you know? You need to be able to answer it.
All right, so
I'll second your,
That's a motion from Joe.
the motion was a while ago, but
table.
I'll second the motion to table.
Is there any public comment? We usually have public comment on anything. It's not very long. Thank you for not having public comment. Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
voted and a motion and a second to table. Okay, maybe have a roll call, please.
Chairperson Bennett?
Yes.
Commissioner Hopper? Yes. Commissioner Friedman?
Yes.
Commissioner Schwartz?
Or
Commissioner Sandberg?
Or motion passes. Thank you very much. Appreciate you working through us. Mr. Curtis. All right. You want to make any city manager comments?
I'm gonna have to suspend my rule, otherwise I don't ever get to talk. I think the only big thing I would do is remind everyone that we have a commissioner training next Wednesday on the 29th. If you're able to make it, we'll have at least 4 commissioners there, so it should be a pretty good turnout. If you can make it, please be there. The Blake and Dan from the extension office are gonna be running that, and so it should be nicely done. That is the biggest thing, and happy Thanksgiving. Thank you very much.
Let's start over there on the west side of the room. Commissioner Sandberg.
So on this discussion, Mr. Cordus,
Yes, ma'am.
so I like the proactiveness and the communications. I'm just wondering, this hasn't been presented to us in a presentation yet. And I'm just wondering if a better, I want to say, I lost my train of thought. I would just assume that this would be presented to the commission first and get our buy-in and support before we're out pitching it to other people. It just kind of makes sense to me. So I guess protocol, perhaps.
Well, I guess this is a weird one because it actually is never going to come before the commission.
But if you're, I understand that, well, because it'll go on as a county levy.
It'll go on as a county unit.
So, but if the city is out promoting it, I would think that you would want the buy-in of the commission.
I absolutely do.
So I'm just, would think, how I would have approached it would be to have the presentation to us first, since these other entities are already receiving a presentation and we haven't received one yet, and get our feel and buy-in before representing the city with other entities.
I guess if you wanted to do the commission meeting, we can certainly do that in the future. I guess I just sent it out and didn't ask you to come in and speak to me about it just to get that. I wanted it to be a more personal one-on-one, since this isn't an official, it's not any kind of official project yet, or is it an official anything. That was just trying to do it individually, as opposed to in a formal setting.
But I just think for us, you know, if it's being promoted that we support it and people are asking us questions, I think it's just great that we're informed first and collaboratively say it's a great idea. So then we really can go out and say we support it. Just an observation. I hate to bring it up, but the Historic Preservation Committee, I look forward and welcome the training changes. Will somebody be on that committee be notified of the current situation that we found?
Yes.
Okay. With that being said, and I keep asking for the criteria, and I think maybe my question is answered is there is no criteria. So it states that the Historic Preservation Committee will create the criteria and it should follow along the lines of XYZ. But basically, we've never defined that criteria then.
No, I don't think there's nothing in city code that defines that. What I sent you is all there is in city code.
That answers my question then. So we could, if we chose, to give direction to the Historic Preservation Committee to come up with that criteria, because basically we don't have any.
Right, and I'd have to go back and look at the code. I'm not sure it says they have to develop criteria. I think it just, that they will base their decisions on the criteria laid out in whatever the manual is.
But we don't have, oh, is that the state manual?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
And I think that's purposely vague because they don't want specific requirements. They just want it to generally be in line with the architecture and historic value of the community.
But it's not happening. So there's something needs to, whatever we're using isn't working. Excuse me. So I think that's just where I was confused. So I could just go back and do my research based on the state, but.
Yeah, I don't think there are specific requirements for any historic district. It's just basically it's the judgment of the Historic Preservation Commission on whether or not that fits in the historic area.
It's pretty unsure.
Well, I understand it is now. I'm just, my clarification
I think it
is
always
does it have
has
to
to.
be?
Oh, it doesn't have to.
Yeah, that's my
Yeah,
question.
That's a good question.
Thank you.
You know, it's got-
Commissioner Swartz?
Oh, I look forward to serving, continue serving citizens in the city of Livingston for the next 4 years. Thank you for allowing me to do that. I yield.
Commissioner Friedman? I'm all right. Move on. Glad to hear that. Commissioner Copeland?
I'll just update on the planning board next time, since it's been a long discussion tonight. I'm just gonna give a little update.
All right.
And thank you also for re-electing me to the commission as well.
All right. So, notes here. There was something on my mind and it's kind of come across the emails recently about the city commission and a quorum and, you know, what the law says and what the spirit of the law says and what common sense says. And I just wrote some notes about it and I wanted to ask Commissioner Sandberg, is that email that you sent out recently, that decision by the Montana Supreme Court, is that still the precedent decision in that case?
I don't know that.
I think it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, anyway, I want to address the concerns that some of the public and the city staff have regarding a quorum or majority of the commission at local events, boards, committees, meetings, and public hearings. During my first year as city commissioner, I attended the planning board meeting to listen to a subject on the agenda in which I had a personal interest. It was a type of subject that would draw larger than normal attendance. And during the course of the public comment, I stood before the planning board and stated my perspective on the subject. Also in attendance was a reporter from the local newspaper to cover the story. 2 days later, an article appeared in the newspaper regarding the meeting. Interested to see what was written, I read the article. As part of the coverage was a couple of paragraphs questioning whether a quorum of the commission was present and that a violation of open meeting laws had occurred. See, there were 2 commissioners that sat on the planning board and myself in attendance. City attorney at the time gave an opinion regarding the meeting and if the quorum did or did not exist. It was stated that a commissioner, as an elected official, does not relinquish their right as a citizen to exercise their First Amendment right to participate in public meetings. And that, in this case, the 3rd commissioner at a meeting did not constitute a making of a quorum. Within the last year and a half, a similar occurrence took place at another planning board meeting. In this case, the numbers were reversed. 1 commissioner sat on the planning board and 2 commissioners attended. Later, we were informed by the city attorney at the time that we could not attend planning board meetings because our presence constituted a quorum and that we were listening to public comments and information upon which we would make decisions at a future date. And that as commissioners, we could not acquire information in this manner. That opinion was based on Montana Code 2-3-202 that states meetings defined as used. In this part, meeting means the convening of a quorum of the constituent membership of a public agency or association described, whether corporal or by means of electronic equipment, to hear, discuss, or act upon matters over which the agency has supervision, control, jurisdiction, or advisory power. Since we were there to hear and learn, we were informed that we could not attend. What is disturbing to me regarding this interpretation is that as a commissioner, it attempts to stifle the commission by placing them in a box of ignorance. It is my duty and a right as a commissioner to be as informed and knowledgeable as possible regarding the issues that come before us. It is my right and duty to listen to our constituents and to respond to their concerns and bring them before the commission and the city. It is also my right to listen to the community discuss issues wherever they occur. I provide the community a once-a-month Saturday listening session. What if everyone that was at that particular planning board meeting wanted to voice their concerns? Should I not listen, or should I send them home? What if all those people who spoke at that planning board meeting where I was not supposed to listen to what they were saying, called me on the phone and again voiced their concerns? Should I hang up on them and tell them I can't listen to their concerns? No. The public certainly expects that we will be well informed. We will decide on when we decide on the use of public funds, services, and how those decisions affect the community. And the public has a right to discuss their objections to any commissioner they please. So where does the letter of the law, the spirit of the law, and common sense intersect and agree? I'm pretty sure that we are to be well informed from any lawful source that is available to us. That means not only the administration, but also attending public events, talking with our constituents, and our own personal research. But let's hear what the Montana Supreme Court stated in reference to a 2014 school board case. Nothing in the letter or spirit of the open meeting statutes prohibits a person in the position of the 4th member in this case that they were referring to from attending and observing a meeting of a subcommittee, along with any other members of the public. In fact, it can be argued that the better public policy would be to encourage members of public bodies to observe such events so they can be better educated and informed about matters that they will later vote on in their official capacities. Penalizing those members and the public bodies they serve by an unwarranted application of the statute creates a difficult labyrinth for public servants and threatens to turn any Saturday night at the Cowboy Country Rodeo into a board meeting that must be noticed. This was the majority opinion, Chief Justice Mike McGrath. Our Republican form of government requires an informed electorate and certainly highly informed electorate representatives. Thank you very much. Is there any public comment tonight?
Jeff Dickerson, 503 North 10th. Just a couple comments. And I apologize, I was not here for that complete discussion on the Fish, Wildlife, and Parks grant that the skateboard's looking at. A couple things, because we've received 2 of those, LYSA has. They're a reimbursement grant, so you still have to raise all the money in order to get reimbursement somehow. And that's always a challenge for a nonprofit.
Me matching?
Well, the way it works is it's match, but they're not gonna pay you the match until you've built, proven that it's built, proven that you spent all the money, and then they will give you that money back. So whatever money they're going to reimburse, someone has to come up with. And that's been a challenge for us working with them. We've managed to figure things out and get it done, but that's because we did do it in phases, and that grant was very specific for irrigation, for example, or something. So as soon as we got done with that part, we could pay everybody, but it wasn't that we had to do the whole project. If that makes sense. Yeah. So that can be a challenge with that grant. The other thing is that in the past, there was only one of those grants given to a community at a time. LYSA currently has a grant, up to a $46,000 match, so that make it $92,000 grant. They'll match 46. Our requirement is to have all our work done and everything's completed, and that money's been paid back to us by December of 18. So you might want to look into that to see if they can award 2 at one time, because in the past they would not. And that's another issue with that grant. They're very good grants, very good people to work with, and certainly could fit this situation, but not the easiest because of the reimbursement situation for one. You know, it's a lot of money to have in your coffers and then figure out. And then what do you do with it afterwards? That's always the LSA had was, we get reimbursed for this. Now we have this money, what do we do for next steps? So that's why we purposely said this is for irrigation, so we could then move ahead with the rest of the project, if that makes sense. So hope that helps, because we certainly want that type of improvement in our community.
I'll let them know then. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other public comment? Yes.
First of all, I'd like to compliment the commission on the remarkable discussion tonight. Thank you. I would like to be sure that this commission has a copy of the Attorney General's ruling on emails and meetings. The Attorney General had ruled that any substantive discussion that involves more than 2 commissioners is in fact a meeting by email. So just wanted to be sure that nothing substantive occurs between the city manager and the commission or among the commissioners that is not available to the public. And at one point, it was suggested that the city manager's emails to the city commissioners just be put on the website so that the public would be privy to the same information that the commissioners received from the city manager. In addition, it wouldn't be that difficult for the city manager's notes, as we've discussed a couple of times, to be available on the website so that the public can see these things. One other comment on the pretty enlightened discussion tonight. was that at the same time that these change orders were taking place, I had put in a Freedom of Information request to the acting city manager, and was informed that the leadership team at no time keeps minutes of their meetings. Seems like it would be helpful. And that happens in other cities where a leadership team just keeps bullet accounts of what is discussed during their leadership team meetings. So that if you have to go back in the record, you can see that a change order was discussed at this particular leadership team meeting. But I don't have any idea what you were discussing, what is that you were handing out?
I didn't hand it out.
Or was handed to you?
Services collaborative funding.
See, that's, as a public member, the public, I know nothing about that. It'd be nice to know, because the public is really very interested in staying informed, and we should know what you know, essentially. I appreciate that. I want to double check. I have two more comments quickly. Want to check on that $2 million Livingston Restoration Group. Has there been any additional information on the wet contract? The $2 million that should be available to the city for the mitigation of carcinogenic plume in the construction of the water treatment plant.
What do you mean by additional information?
Well, we in fact know that approximately $2 million has been spent on what you and I had that discussion about. We don't know exactly how much has been spent, but it's up to $2 million possibly has been spent on mitigating the soils as they proceeded with the water treatment plant by the WET organization, who is a subcontractor of the city, but is also the only organization, the engineering firm, that has been paid by the Livingston Restoration Group. The city is owed $2 million. In my judgment, having followed this or something similar to that, and I was just wondering if there's been any effort to collect that money.
We still aren't done with the wet contract, so
Okay.
no, we're not proceeding with anything until we know what the final cost is.
And so, isn't that pretty much in line with the discussion tonight? That wouldn't it be nice if the city commission knew how much has been, approximately how much money has been spent thus far on soil mitigation that is available to the city through the Livingston Restoration Group? It would be nice to know for the public also to be updated
right now. As far as I know, there's no money available right now from the Livingston Restoration Group to the city.
But there should be. That money is,
That's a totally different question. All I know is right now there is no money available to the city.
Okay.
Whether or not there should be is a topic.
There absolutely should be. That is the terms of the litigation. That money is there specifically, and I had that discussion with Amy Reynolds of DEQ. That money is supposed to be available. The city's supposed to be paid through WET. I mean, WET is supposed to be paid by the Livingston Restoration Group, not the city, for that soil mitigation. And
If I may, Patricia,
yes,
just real quick.
okay. So I just was
Someone
wondering if there's
someone
nothing.
might call Commissioner Caldwell, because when he was on the commission, he sat on that board. And he might have some idea of what funds are still available, if any, to the city.
In fact, I talked to DEQ about that. Amy Reynolds, and in fact, that money is there. And it should be available to the city, and the city should be paid. The city, the Livingston Restoration Group should be paying the city, not the city paying for WET's contract. That's a lot of money. It'd just be nice to see if there's an update on that, and the public stay informed on this as well. And one other thing, I want to underscore Commissioner Sandberg's concept that Katie Weaver, the commission, began to develop guidelines for Katie Weaver's work. I think that'd be wonderful because, as you know, a couple of years ago, the downtown building owners had presented an economic enhancement plan. There's a great deal of money we are not tapping into for economic development. There's over $800,000 for winter ski season. There is money for wayfinding signage. So it would be lovely if we could begin to communicate with each other and if the commission would set those guidelines. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there any other public comment tonight? Any other public comment? Okay. Is there a motion for adjournment from the commission? So moved. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. This meeting of the Livingston City Commission is adjourned at 9:02.
Small blessings.
That's for sure.
Sorry, I got work to do. You want to start practicing more?
Oh, yeah.
Listen to the.
I'm coming.
I didn't say words.
I just didn't know.
Thank you. I'm sure that it was good for technical. Sure, that stuff's pretty technical. That's something she could get with. But who told her?
Yeah, you should.
And you know, the sad thing is that the 56,000 is probably more than what they paid her, you know. All right.
Yeah.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Thanks, you too.